Hopefully
and the audio. Make sure you've got audio.
We've resolved the issue of sound and vision, that you can see me now more clearly. Seemingly I was not on screen. So you might have heard me but not seen me. So I was just talking about some of the history of acupuncture and how the Neijing came about, with a conversation between Qibo and Huangdi being the emperor, the Yellow Emperor, and his medical practitioner Qibo. That takes us into more modern times. That various Chinese doctors would have taken the Neijing and utilized that text and added their own little twists and things like that. So there are various other texts that would open the way to the theories of acupuncture and how it works and things like that. Coming to more modern times, I guess the use of acupuncture during 1934 to 1935 would have been with Mao Zedong, who actually used it on what they called the Long March into Beijing to bring in the reign of communism into China. The use of acupuncture in that time was happening quite regularly, and the powers that be, the Communist Party at that time, decided that acupuncture would be used in conjunction with Western medicine. So you'll find that from 1934 onwards, acupuncture and traditional Chinese medicine has been used in combination with Western medicine and throughout history. And how did acupuncture get into the West, really? There is a much longer history, and if we look at some of the texts from the universities in Edinburgh, we can go back to the 1700s and see that there are some texts of using acupuncture in the UK very early on. It's not often found, but it is there. But for us in the West, I think the time that acupuncture became most widely known would have been in the 1970s. So at that time, Richard Nixon was the president of the States, and he was the first president to visit China. Whilst in China, one of the press corps with him, James Reston of the New York Times, developed an appendix problem, had his appendix removed, and he actually received acupuncture treatment for the appendix pain and post-operative. He wrote an article in the New York Times at that time, and from that article, acupuncture has taken off in the world. It's literally become worldwide and grown and continues to grow, partly because of its effectiveness, partly because it's not drug-based. If you have pains or aches and pains and you're taking medications, there's potentially always a bit of a side effect. So the biggest side effect of acupuncture is that actually you improve and your condition gets better. So that leads you into acupuncture becoming more widely accepted in the 70s. However, it still wasn't practiced widely in America. And in 1974, Dr. Miriam Lee, who had now left China and had made her way into America, was given a research post at the San Francisco University to research and use acupuncture and see how it worked. This led to her helping to write the legislation for the legalizing of acupuncture in America. Now, in America, every state board for acupuncture is slightly different. So if you're working in a different state, you have to pass that state board to practice. So we're moving into the more modern era of acupuncture. And as I said earlier, that has led to the use of a variety of styles. So we've got the dry needling, we've got the sujok, we've got the Korean hand acupuncture, we've got auricular acupuncture, we've got abdominal acupuncture. These different uses of the same tool. So what would you expect from an acupuncture treatment? Well, what you'll find is that your practitioner is largely going to sit you down and ask you what's going on. They will then start to ask a variety of questions, and depending on how you answer, what you're saying, the practitioner will be starting to work out what they're actually going to do in terms of how they're going to utilize the points and needles and where they're going to place them to have the best outcome for you. So the questions will be structured in such a way as to elicit information which might seem a bit odd at times, but it's because they're understanding how the internal environment is working. And by asking specific questions, it leads us to be able to understand how the internal system is broken down. Along with that, they will be asking to look at your tongue. So there'll be a tongue diagnosis. So what we know, even from the Western perspective, is what comes out of the body tells us about what's going on inside the body. So if you'd be asked questions maybe about the stools or about urine or about saliva, so the consistency, how often, if there's any vomiting, things like that, would be giving information about how the internal landscape is working. The tongue itself has several areas on it that relate to the internal organs. So by looking at the tongue and the topography of the tongue, the practitioner can make a decision about the appropriate imbalances in the body and how they're going to utilize the meridian system, generally speaking, to affect a change. That combined with the questions, so you've answered some questions about your condition, we've looked at the tongue, and then we'll look at the pulse. Now the pulse is taken on the wrist, so on the radial side, on the radial pulse, in 3 positions. And pulse taking, again, is somewhat interesting. That's developed. So traditional practitioners would have taken the pulses at different points. So in the neck, in the axilla, so in the armpit, in the groin, behind the knee, and on the dorsum of the foot. So those pulse points would tell the practitioner something about the internal way of the body, what's happening in the body. China was invaded by the Mongols from Mongolia, and at that time, the emperor was seen to be divine. So the emperor, if you've ever seen the Young Emperor, the film, you'll see the emperor is in a curtained cubicle, because being divine, you can't look at the emperor. So he would actually put his hand through a curtain so that only the wrist was on show, and the practitioner could therefore touch the wrist on the radial pulse and in those positions tell the condition of the internal body. So looking at the organs and how they're operating and what energy flow is happening with them. So all this information together builds up a diagnosis of the system. So basing that together, the practitioner would then be able to decide where the major imbalance is, and it could be that we end up with an organ out of balance and the signs and symptoms. So for example, if you came in with nausea, the practitioner would say, well, the organ that's out of balance is the stomach, because in terms of Chinese medicine, the stomach itself, the energy of the stomach should go down, which makes sense in the West. when we eat something, we don't really expect to see it again. We'd like it to go down in through the gastrointestinal tract to be processed and turn into fuel for the body. If that is coming back up, as in vomiting or in nausea, it means that it's going the wrong way, so there's an imbalance. So the practitioner would look to see, there's an imbalance in the stomach, and is that imbalance coming entirely from the stomach? Is it something we've eaten that's upset us, or is it something in the body that's upset us? So basing it on that, it might be that we need to work with two or three organs to help balance the one. So we'd utilize the points that way. That would form the basis of the diagnosis. So it's a little bit like having a conductor. If you imagine you've got an orchestra, the orchestra is laid out in a specific style. So you'd have the wind section, you'd have the woodwinds, you'd have the flutes and the kettle drums at the back and the piano in certain areas. And the conductor has the music, has his baton, and he's interpreting that score of music. And he's bringing the orchestra into play appropriate at the right time, with the right tempo, introducing the different instruments into the choral piece or the orchestral piece, and how he's interpreting that piece is how it sounds. There's pace and timing of everything. So acupuncture is not very dissimilar. We have elicited some information by questioning. We've elicited some information by observing. We've elicited some information by touching. And that leads us into making a decision about what to do, where to do it, how to do it. I was talking a little earlier about the Iron Man who was cast for the practitioners to learn their points. So I have my colleague with me today. He's he's not very talkative, but he's here to help us out. So let me introduce the Meridian Man. So we have our Meridian Man here. And as you can see, it's a modern one, he's plastic. So traditionally it would have been a full-size model made of iron. And the areas you see here, where you can see these are Chinese characters, the lines on here are the meridian lines, and where the darker areas are where the points would be along those meridian pathways. So this is a model that is used in training. It just helps the learners to become proficient in where the points are. What we have is, generally speaking, there are 6 yin and 6 yang meridians. So they run up and down the body. And the front of the body is generally more yin. This is the yin aspect of the body, and the back is the more yang aspect of the body. So in locating the points and being able to needle appropriately, the practitioner is able to deal with a myriad of conditions. So we can deal with all sorts of things. I'll just move him out of the way for a minute. So if we were dealing with pain, pain's a condition that lots of people have for a lot of different reasons, whether they've got sports injuries, they've been sitting awkwardly. We've been through somewhat of a stressful time over the last few months for the majority of everybody. And in that space, we've had to work from home. Some people haven't been able to work, which causes a certain amount of stress. And life's been a very different thing. So it presents different challenges in the physical world for us. That could be postural. So we've adopted some bad postures as a result of playing for longer on our PlayStations or Xboxes, or a change in our working practices and lifestyle. That can all lead to a change in our sleeping and eating as well. So we might find that because we haven't been at work, we've become more friendly with the fridge. And in that partnership with the fridge, we put on a few pounds. That's allowed us to change some other habits. Maybe we haven't been as active. We might not have gone out, or because we couldn't go to the gym, we weren't working out in the same way. So these types of things can create a slight imbalance in the body, but also in the physical body. So we've put on a few pounds, so it's a little harder to run that 5 kilometers or whatever we'd be doing. It might impinge on how we run that because we're carrying a little bit more weight now. So we could end up with some sporting injuries. So of course the option would be to see the chiropractor, see the physio, to see the osteopath or someone like that. And if we're then dealing with some pain because we've got some pain, then in conjunction with those services, you could see the acupuncturist. He's going to work from the outside in, so basing the needles into the skin and through the skin has the information highway of the body stimulate and produce a chemical response. The chemical response is going to help us to both improve our mental health and our physical health. So it could help improve sleep. It could help improve our general demeanor in the world. And therefore, once that starts to change, then other things can change. So that we're able to feel happier. And in feeling happier, we're able to engage in life in a more pleasant and enjoyable way. And therefore the outcomes are better and our general health improves. Our social interactions improve. Maybe we don't have the aches and pains when we're sitting in the car. We don't get so frustrated. And life seems to be enhanced by everything we do. So acupuncture is able to help in lots of different ways. And it seems strange in that by placing needles into specific parts of the body, and quite often I utilize the ear as a modality of treatment just because of its power. It's a part of the body that can actually engender great change for people, both physically, mentally, and emotionally. I've seen it change people's lives and support them in creating and maintaining that change. So it's a modality of treatment that is sometimes underestimated for its power, its literal power. So what do we use? What are the tools that we use within acupuncture? Well, there are several tools, and I have a little cushion with me with some needles in. So the needles look a little bit like this. Generally, the needles, the most common needles that you will see are the filiform needles, which have a copper handle that's wound, a wound copper handle. They're very fine, as you can see. So the practitioner doesn't hold this end of the needle, they hold the handle end, and the needle is placed into the body. They come in different lengths. So we have some very long needles. And the longer needles would be used in the deeper and bigger muscles. So in the muscle groups, say into the gluteal muscles. So if you had some sciatic pain that was running down the back of the leg through the buttocks, a longer needle would be put in to create the sensation. And by placing the needle into the body, what we have is a connection to the energetic pathway. So one of the things that we know about the body is that the body is made up of electricity and water. 70% of the body is water, and there's an electrical impulse in the body that communicates. So some of the modern research that's happening is happening in and around this information system. So more and more people are looking at fascia, and fascia is a connective tissue that wraps itself around all the organs, all the bones, and all the internal landscape. So what we know is that we've got things like livers, and we've got stomachs and spleens and intestines. The intestines are wrapped in a sheath of connective tissue which separates them so they don't get stuck on each other. They can slide and glide. So as we're moving, if we're doing some exercise, if you're doing some Pilates or some yoga and you're stretching, you don't want all the organs sticking together. So the fascia that wraps around them allows the tissues to slide and ease. In that sliding, we also have some communication. So there is something called piezoelectricity. Piezoelectricity is stimulated generally when we walk. So the action of walking stimulates the pressure through the foot and through the bones, which generates a piezoelectricity. This electricity travels through the body and travels up into the central nervous system. It allows the body to lay down new tissue to make sure that the bones are regenerated in an appropriate manner. And along the bones, you will find that there are specific lines that the energy travels along. And so they're sort of structure lines that allow the force of the movement to travel through the body. So this lines that surgeons will actually follow to do surgery. So they will look at fascia and they'll be guided by the lines of fascia to extract organs, if that's what they're doing. If you're having your gallbladder removed, we know where the gallbladder is in an anatomical map. And now with keyhole surgery, we can put a camera in, we can actually see where it is, place the tools in, do the snipping and remove it with very little invasion of the body. We haven't got to make a big incision these days to exit organs. However, that information highway and what we're doing with that information has been mapped as the meridian pathway. So what we have is, back to this fella here, these pathways, which are on the back and the front of the body, had been mapped for centuries. And what we're finding is that modern science is obviously allowing us access in a very different way to the body. So we're looking at fascia in a new light. We're looking at how that helps the body to keep itself protected and to keep itself moving. So by placing needles into the body, into certain areas, basically, if you think a little bit like your PIN number, so these days we seem to have a password and a PIN number for everything. The acupuncture practitioner would be utilizing a PIN number. It's a bit of a pun, I suppose, if we're using calling the needles pins. But by selecting 6, 8, 10 needles or points to needle, what happens is the information highway of the body, this internal healer within, is stimulated to produce endorphins, as an example. Now, endorphins, we know, are a major painkiller. They will help us feel good. So any of you who are watching, who are runners, you will create the endorphins when you're on that long run and you're feeling tired, and you make that breakthrough, and suddenly you get that euphoric feeling of how good it is. What you've done is you've stimulated the body to produce natural endorphins. So the same thing happens with the needles, except that we can create additional hormonal streams to help stimulate the body into a healing space, so that actually the body can heal itself and create the change. So generally speaking, people who have come for treatment are out of balance. So somewhere in the system's not quite right. So instead of being in a nice balanced way, we've come out of balance. And what the practitioner's doing is trying to come back into a space so that movement can happen within an equilibrium. So in Western terms, that would be seen as being in a homeostatic balance, so where the body is balanced and harmonious. It seems like a simple thing to do. It takes time to understand the anatomy of the body. So a practitioner would learn Western anatomy, so understanding the organs, understanding the muscles, the connective tissue, and then understanding how they work and understanding how they operate in or out of balance. So if you've got something out of balance, what's going on? So commonly speaking, for something like headaches can be quite common, probably more common now over the last few months, few weeks, partly because of certain changes in circumstances. We're probably all spending a little more time on our computers and having more screen time, whether that's a laptop or a desktop or even a handheld tablet or down to a phone. So the potential for that is that we create more tension in our necks purely because of the posture that we adopt when we're utilizing our devices. But from the stiffness that we might create because habitually in looking down with our phones to use them, we create a certain amount of stiffness in the neck, which means that the flow of the body can get disrupted. You might find that if you get stiffness in the neck, you also get stiffness in the lower back. Now, that could be down to the chair that you're sitting on whilst looking at your phone. It could just be that the stiffness in the upper neck is also then reflected into the lower back. And the practitioner will utilize certain points either in the lower back, so we could needle somewhere into the lower back here to create the change so that actually the energetic flow through the back, and you can see that these meridians go all the way up through the neck. I can actually get it right. There we go. Do it back to front. So you've got meridians that run all the way down the back. So if you do have shoulder pain, the meridians come across the shoulders, they come down the spine into the lower back. So sometimes the pain in the North Pole is reflected in the South Pole. And the practitioner can utilize the needles to adjust that and have the flow improved so that the muscles that are tight in the neck can relax and the muscles that are tense can reduce that tension and allow balance and harmony to happen so that when you're turning your neck, the muscles are not quite so tight on either side. Consequently, that can happen if we get knee pain. When we get knee pain, that can throw the hips out, that can throw the lower back out, can throw out the shoulders. By addressing the cause or the root cause of the problem, you may get a manifestation in a different area. So you might get hip pain, and although we're focusing on the hip to release the tension and discomfort in the hip area, in actual fact, that discomfort may be caused by the knee pain, because as you're walking or sitting, you might sit differently due to the discomfort in the knee. You might find that driving is impaired, so you sit slightly differently in the seat, and that puts out your back so that you get more stiffness in the back, but it's caused by the knee pain that you're now sitting differently in the car or when you're walking or jogging or doing whatever. So the acupuncturist needs to take into account the whole body, not just the cause, what's brought you for treatment. So if you've come for treatment for a headache, We need to be aware of what might be going on inside. We need to ask the questions appropriate to the headache, so that we can make a decision about what to treat, and if we need to refer on to someone else. So we may need to refer on for an MRI scan or something like that to make sure that there's no underlying major problem, and that actually acupuncture is going to be the most appropriate treatment to get you back into full health and to full fighting fitness. And a lot of this is down to the skill of the practitioner. So you can find practitioners up and down the country offering treatment. Most of them are well trained. Occasionally you'll find people that have done a shorter course that might not be quite as well versed in the traditional acupuncture. They may have done a shorter course and have less access to points if they haven't done a training in traditional Chinese medicine. Normally, most practitioners will have undergone at least 3 years of training. They will have covered Western sciences as well as anatomy, physiology, pathology, and acupuncture theory. So when you receive a treatment from a practitioner, you are receiving treatment from someone who's very well trained in both Western and Oriental theory, generally speaking. So the practitioner will happily treat a myriad of conditions. So we can treat conditions from headaches, stiffness, eating disorders, weight management, stress and anxiety, smoking cessation, all sorts of things like that, through the use of needles and the appropriate use of needles in specific areas of the body. So commonly, one of the common areas that a lot of people may have received treatment is through the ear, auricular acupuncture. Auricular acupuncture has quite a long history. Its more modern history is really illustrated from 1957, when a French physician, Dr. Paul Noguer, actually wrote a thesis on auricular medicine. He developed a theory of a homunculus, or a little man in the ear. So we had the ear, and in the ear, the whole body is represented. His paper was accepted at an exhibition in Switzerland, and auricular acupuncture and auricular medicine was born. That's moved on somewhat now, and we actually have electro machines that we can use to stimulate the same points, but without the use of a needle, with the use of an electrical stimulation. We have color. So we're developing, or the people training in acupuncture are looking at color training, using different colors to train because the skin picks up color. And lasers. So again, laser is light, and in different waves and different wavelengths. So acupuncture is developing into a modern treatment, and the laser being the most modern representation of a treatment modality for the same points. So we're utilizing the same points as the traditional 5,000-year-old points that have existed. We're just using a different stimulus to create the same healing pattern within the body. So if anybody out there that's viewing has any questions, anything they'd like to ask, then please feel free to send a message. I can see them all here on the screen. And that might help you, help everyone else who is asking any questions or has got some questions and is a bit nervous to ask. The use of acupuncture, has been widely used. It's commonly used now. It's less commonly used in the NHS, although there are several projects that do use it for pain management and things like that. Most of the time these days it would be delivered through physiotherapy, the physiotherapists, and occasionally GPs. So GPs will have done what's called Western acupuncture. So they will have a Western diagnosis and then a pool of points that they would utilize to create change in the body from a traditional background, where the physios would be using, depending on how they trained, whether they were using dry needling to elicit a change in the body, or if they'd had a little bit longer training and they were utilizing more traditional Chinese medicine protocols and theories to elicit that change. However, the use of acupuncture is getting wider, and the more recent studies have come back to the ear, and there's a colonel in the United States who developed a protocol which is realistically a pain protocol. Colonel Nimzow. Colonel Nimzow was a colonel in the US Air Force, based at, I can't remember which Air Force base he was at now. But he kind of was looking at people in the battlefield. How could he bring pain relief without the use of medications? Because sometimes if you've got someone on generally a morphine-based pain relief, they can't receive certain drugs, or certain procedures can't be administered if they've received some morphine-based pain relief. So he looked at the ear and he devised a protocol of 5 specific points that he found operated very well. So the starting point of the use of this protocol was in the Special Forces. So Special Forces medics were trained to use this battlefield approach, that should there be a casualty, instead of giving an opiate-based pain relief, they would use these 5 points. The 5 points would be applied. And what they found is that anybody who'd received the points actually had less PTSD, had quicker recovery times, and needed less pain relief after they'd been evacuated into a medical facility. So it's had a lot of research done through the American military and is now widely used in the veterans. So a lot of the American vets who have been on a morphine-based pain relief are coming into veteran charities to receive acupuncture treatment to help with the withdrawals from the opium-based medications. So it's moving from the military world into the private medical sector, so through acupuncturists. Sometimes physios or osteopaths may have trained in the procedure to help ameliorate pain, because if you're in pain, you're less likely to be able to utilize the movements you might be given by your physiotherapist, for example. If you are released from the pain, it's much easier to work the specific muscle groups to strengthen those to allow for a fuller recovery. And hopefully that as this progression happens, as we move into more modern times, that it will progress into first responders, so people, ambulance crews, emergency rooms, being able to offer some pain relief without medications, which means that any tests being carried out are not slurred by any medications that are in the system of the individual receiving the tests. So I think acupuncture has a a history, and I think it continues to have a history. More and more people are seeking treatments that don't include strong medications. We've been given lots of information about how bacteria are becoming resistant to antibiotics. So if we can look at how in the modern world we can utilize some older treatment modalities, so maybe herbs or some oils or physical therapies can be utilized to help us move forward into a modern approach to some of the older techniques to balance the body and create a healing space. And I think acupuncture has a role in that the receiver, once needled, generally is lying down, which means that they're relaxed. Once the body is relaxed, the body can take over. The body knows how to heal. It's an innate healer inside. We may have all had a little cut, nicked ourselves while preparing in the kitchen, or had a little paper cut in the office or something like that. We don't consciously ask the body and sit down and say, oh, could you just mend that paper cut and concentrate on it? Once the sting and the pain's gone away, the body naturally takes over to create healing. And acupuncture helps the body to move it more quickly into that healing space by reducing inflammation, reducing swelling, reducing pain, and harmonizing the body, getting it back to balance. So acupuncture, although it has a history, it also is relevant into the 21st century. And as we move into that space, hopefully you'll be looking to find a practitioner close to where you are. And because we're on Facebook Live, I could be right around the world. I don't quite know who's tuning in. But if you're looking for a practitioner, make sure they're trained suitably. Have asked for their credentials, find out where they've trained, how long they've trained with, and you'll find a practitioner that can help you to recover from a myriad of conditions. You may want to have a conversation with them first to find out how they can help you, what they feel they can do, so that you feel happy with that practitioner and the way they're going to work to meet you. Now, obviously, this broadcast is coming out through Perfect Balance. So should you want to check out Perfect Balance and what we have to offer, you can always go to the website and check that out, and go to www.perfectbalanceclinic.com. Or you can ring in and ask for an appointment, or just generally see if you'd like to have a consultation. We can always organise a 15-minute phone call. And if you go to 0800 072 4012, we'd be happy to talk to you about the role acupuncture can play in your healthcare. And I will no doubt be back on the Power Hour at some point. But as we draw to a conclusion, I await any of the questions that might come through. It's difficult to, as I'm here on my own, I have no one to bounce anything off. So if you'd like to ping something up, I'd be happy to answer any of those questions. Otherwise, I'm going to bring it to a conclusion and wish you all a very pleasant evening, and trust that this has been helpful, and that I look forward to seeing you on Power Hour again in the future. So thank you for spending this evening, this hour with me, and I look forward to seeing you all again soon. Thank you very much. Goodbye now.